Hello friends, let's start with a big roundup. Xbox just held another partner preview and honestly there was a lot packed into it. First up is Hunter the Reckoning Deathwish, a first-person action game set in the World of Darkness universe, and it's currently aiming for summer 2027. From what the devs shared, you're playing in a version of New York where your whole life was basically built on a lie. You discover there's this whole hidden world full of monsters lurking in the shadows, and you're almost constantly being forced to choose to become the hunter or the hunted. According to developers, if you've ever watched Supernatural, that seems like the closest comparison. Next is the Expanse Osiris Reborn, the new third-person RPG from All Cat Games. It got a fresh gameplay look, a beta announcement, and a release window. And while some of it still looks a little stiff, this might actually be one of the biggest games in the whole lineup. It has that classic AA budget, AAA ambition vibe. And for anyone not super familiar with the Expanse, the setup is basically a future where different human factions across the solar system are in conflict. The game promises a brand new story in that universe with crew management and relationship building, but also action-packed combat and choices that are supposed to have major long-term consequences. Then there is Alien Deathstorm, a brand new first-person action horror game from Rebellion, the studio behind Atomfall and Sniper Elite. Now, first things first, this is not about the face-hugging xenomorph kind of aliens. It's still about aliens, just not those aliens. You're exploring a ruined off-world colony that's been smashed by a massive megastorm and overrun by hostile extraterrestrial life. And apparently the creatures might not even be your biggest problem, because the weather itself is a major gameplay threat. So you'll also need to figure out when to push forward and when to get to safety. Out of everything shown, this is probably the one that stood out most to me. Even though it's been positioned as more of a mid-tier project, it looks way better than that. Now, if you want something a little more relaxed, Forever Ago might be the one. This is the debut game from the indie studio Third Shift and it's coming in this fall. It's a narrative adventure where you play as Alfred, traveling north in search of redemption. Along the way, you'll visit beautiful places, take photos, meet characters, and build new connections. And the story sounds like it's going for something pretty emotional too, touching on broken dreams, loss, regret, but also hope, courage, and friendship. So yeah, this definitely looks like the calmer, more heartfelt game of the bunch. And probably the most unexpected one, Serious Sam Shatterverse. This new entry is turning the series into a roguelike shooter with up to 5-player co-op. You play as one of the 5 alternate universe versions of Sam, all teaming up to save the Shatterverse from the series' longtime villain, Mental. It definitely looks a little strange, not gonna lie, but if you got nostalgia for Serious Sam, I can absolutely see this scratching that itch. Now let's speed things up a little bit and quickly browse through the rest. Artificial Detective was announced, a third-person action adventure, where you step into the shoes of a robot detective in a dystopian city overrun by rogue robots. Ascended to Zero was revealed, a hack-and-slash roguelike set in the year 2225, where you are the last survivor of humanity, traveling back in time where every run makes you stronger. A new Bluey game was announced as well, where you discover familiar locations, play with loads of toys, and use Bluey's camera to capture your favorite moments. Dispatch was set to be released on Xbox, and even without any weird censorship this time. Speaking of Xbox releases, Hades 2 is set to be released on the platform too. A new platformer was announced with the Eternal Life of Goldman, that looks like every other platformer at first glance, but a pretty unique protagonist promises it to be more than that. Speaking of platformers, Frog Sqwad was revealed, where you squad up with your frog friends to solve puzzles for the glory of the Swamp King. Another narrative game that was announced was Grave Seasons, a farming sim with a terrifying twist. Someone in the town is a supernatural serial killer. Next is Musa Dirty Fate, an action game based on the story of revenge, responsibility and ambition centered on the 17th century Korea. The first big expansion for Stalker 2 was announced with Coast of Hope. Stranger Than Heaven was revealed, an epic saga of men battling through 5 eras and 5 cities. The infamous Tough as Nails platformer now in 3D, Super Meat Boy has now a release date of March 31st. A new tactical RPG Vaunted was announced, a story of bullets, bravado and brazen lies across a galaxy of treasure hunters and crime syndicates. And last but not least, Wuthering Waves, a story-rich action RPG built around exploration and freedom. Phew, that was a lot. What was your top pick from this showcase? Now let's move on to the rest of the industry, shall we? It looks like Pearl Abyss may already be shifting focus away from Crimson Desert and onto its next big project. According to Insider Gaming, during a recent stakeholder meeting, the company's CEO said the core development team is now moving over to DokeV. Apparently this was part of the plan all along. Back in 2019, Pearl Abyss intended to build multiple major titles in parallel, including Crimson Desert and DokeV, both using the same engine. While Crimson Desert was in full production, the DokeV side was working on assets and other prep in the background. Now that the Crimson Desert is out, the main team can finally switch over fully. The CEO also said it will probably take another 2 to 3 years before they're ready to properly show or say much about DokeV. And honestly, that tells us a couple of things. First, it probably means Crimson Desert is unlikely to get any huge expansions. Companies usually don't move most of their main team away if they're planning something major post-launch. Second, it feels like Pearl Abyss is trying to become more of a pipeline studio. Finish one big premium game, then roll straight into the next one. In theory, that makes sense. They've proven they can ship a large-scale title, and the game has already sold over 3 million copies, which is no small achievement. That said, Crimson Desert definitely wasn't flawless. It didn't get universal praise, and it also brought up some real concerns, specifically around AI asset use, hardware support, and story criticism. Those aren't small issues, and they clearly affected how the game was received. So the real question now is whether Pearl Abyss has learned from that. I guess we'll find out when we finally see more of DokeV. Also, quick thing, if you don't know who I am, my name is Alex, I'm a game producer and I'm here to help you get caught up on everything that's going on in the video game industry. If you've been loving the recent Zelda games but still miss the older ones, there is a rumor that might get your attention. According to a notable Nintendo leaker cited by Insider Gaming, Nintendo could be working on a remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for Switch 2. The claim is that because the series' anniversary is happening this year, Nintendo is planning to release it in the second half of 2026, closer to the holiday season. Now, obviously none of this is official yet, so take it with a grain of salt. But if it does turn out to be true, it would be a huge move for Nintendo. Ocarina of Time is still one of the most iconic Zelda games ever made, especially for longtime fans. And for newer players, it could be a perfect way to experience one of the most important games in the franchise's history. It could also be a smart boost for Switch 2, especially if Nintendo wants a major nostalgia-driven release to help push hardware later in the year. The only big question is what form this actually takes. Are we talking about a full remake or just an HD remaster? Because I'm pretty sure most Zelda fans would rather see a full remake. Have you ever wondered how much does it cost to make a AAA game? The short answer is a lot. The longer answer came from Jason Schreier at Bloomberg, who's recently said that based on what he's heard across the industry, AAA game budgets in the US and Canada are now often sitting around $300 million or more. And according to him, that money mostly goes into development salaries, and not executive pay, which is usually tied more to stock. Of course, exact numbers are hard to confirm because most companies don't publicly reveal full development budgets. I mean, every now and again we get a few details, like with earlier Bloomberg reports on games such as Call of Duty Black Ops or The Last of Us Part 2, but it's not exactly common. Still, whether the exact number is a little higher or lower, the bigger point is obvious. These games are now incredibly expensive to make. And that explains a lot about what's happening in the industry right now. When projects cost this much, publishers start thinking less like creatives and more like investors. A game isn't just competing for players anymore, it's competing for budget internally too. Even after spending tens of millions already, companies will still hesitate before putting in tens of millions more. Add in declining revenue, unrealistic expectations, and plain old mismanagement, and yeah, it's not that hard to see why so many projects are getting cancelled. At this point, heavy cost scrutiny is probably just the new normal for AAA game development. Now, last week we talked about Sony shutting down dark Outlaw games, and now studio head Jason Blundell has shared a bit of his side of the story. During a stream with JC Backfire, who also worked at the studio, Blundell said there is no real bad blood between him and Sony. Obviously there is disappointment because getting Shutdown is never easy, but there is also seemed to be some understanding that priorities in game development can change very quickly. Interestingly, while they couldn't say much about the actual project, they did reveal that it was not a live service game, which is kind of surprising considering how hard Sony has been pushing in that direction lately. They also said they think players would have been genuinely excited about what they were making. I do have to say though, both of them handled it pretty calmly, especially considering this is apparently the second time Sony has done something like this to Blundell. At this point, there is not much else to do but move on. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about what that mystery project actually was. And now I'm kind of wondering, does Sony go for a hat trick at this point with Blundell? Hopefully not, the poor guy probably had enough. And to wrap things up, Metacritic recently shared its rankings of the best game publishers of 2025, and honestly the results are a little surprising. The first thing that really jumps out is that Microsoft finished ahead of both Nintendo and Sony. A lot of that seems to come down to games like Forza Horizon 5 and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Kind of funny really, because in both cases we're talking about ports. But to be fair, PlayStation's best performing title was also a port, The Last of Us Part 2 on PC, so I guess that balances things out a bit. But the real headline here is Square Enix taking the first place. Apparently this is the first time in 16 years of these rankings that Square Enix has come out on top, which is pretty big deal. And when you look at how many Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest releases scored really well, it starts to make a lot of sense. Now, to be fair, this is still a pretty niche ranking. It's not some universal final word on who's the best publisher, and it definitely doesn't mean everyone agrees. But still, it's a really solid achievement, especially because Metacritic is still one of those platforms that gets a lot of attention. And that's all I have for you today, friends. Let me know down in the comments what was your favorite announcement from the Xbox Partner Preview, whether you are excited about a potential Zelda remake, and if you were looking forward to DLCs for Crimson Desert. As usual, if you want to know more, all links are down below. And of course, clicking the like button helps this channel a lot, and I personally highly appreciate it. Thank you for making it this far, and with that, Alex is signing off for today. Cheers!